Hi, SJ. What should I call you? SJ? Oh, hang on a second. I had your mic off. There we go.
Oh, no worries.
What should I call you?
SJ's fine.
Okay. And I'm really big and you're really small, but I guess we'll have to make do with that. Well, thank you for coming on. I've heard about you for over a year now. I've seen you on Twitter. I'm not sure where I first saw you or heard about you. I'm not sure how you found me. Was it through Twitter?
Yes, I'm sure it's through Twitter. I think that's where I found everybody.
Yeah, okay. So I have some plans for you today, and I think you'll like it.
Oh, good. You can't go wrong with that, right?
I hope you'll like it. But I want to start off with just asking you some rapid fire type questions. There's no right or wrong answer, so people can get to know where you're coming from, who you are. How many years have you been a Christian?
Well, it's kind of it's not that easy of an answer for that one because
Roughly.
I was raised as a cat. I mean, as old as I am, basically, I've been a Christian, except for I was a rather weak Christian for at least 2 decades, if you want to put it that way. So,
Okay. And if you had to choose one, Protestant, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, or other, what would you put yourself in? What category of Christian?
currently, I'm Protestant.
Okay. Would you consider yourself leaning more Calvinist or Arminian? Or other?
Molinist, more Molinist.
Okay.
I haven't studied Armenian. I'm assuming that's probably closer to Molinism, so I'm probably closer to that.
Okay. Who would you say is your favorite or most effective apologist you've seen?
Well, the most effective, my favorite apologist is C.S. Lewis. The most effective apologist I've seen of late is William Lane Craig.
Okay. Which book of the Bible would you say you've studied the most?
That's a good question. Probably, let me think. Probably a combination actually of Luke and Acts, but I have to say I read Matthew and John quite a bit. The one I probably out of the Gospels that I read the least is Mark, and of the epistles and everything else. I also read. I've also read quite a bit in Romans. That's another one that I tend to like.
Okay. This is true or false or yes or no. What's better. Let's do true or false. And again, this is from your belief perspective, your opinion perspective. God exists.
True.
Angels and demons exist.
True.
Satan exists.
True. Hey, you're right on a roll. I got 3 in a row.
A place of torment exists called hell.
True. Yeah, we can get into the details on that in a moment.
Okay. Adam and Eve existed.
True.
Abraham and Moses existed.
True.
A donkey talked in history.
Well, it certainly says that.
That's a true?
I think that some of you have to look at the Bible and realize that there are certain situations where we do have some genres. We do have a little bit of mythological genres in certain places, and we have some places where.
Do you believe a donkey? Okay. Do you believe a donkey talked in history? It's your opinion. Whether nobody knows the truth of it per se, but do you believe a donkey talked in history?
I mean, it's the same as asking if a certain serpent talked, because we have a serpent talking and we have a donkey talking. So I'll just go ahead and say true.
Okay. And this is similar. Do you believe, true or false, a man lived in the belly of a great fish in history?
Jonah? Sure. True.
Okay. Jesus is God and God is Jesus.
True.
God said it was okay to buy foreign slaves.
God regulated the slavery practice. So God didn't, the way that you're phrasing that, it sounds like this was something that God encouraged, and that certainly wasn't the way it was. God just regulated it. So God set the rules for how people should treat slaves in the Old Testament, and actually through the Onesimus and the way that Paul was treating Onesimus and encouraged Onesimus's former master to treat Onesimus gave us a good clue as far as how slaves should be treated as brothers, and not in the way that they were treated during the antebellum period in the recent U.S. times.
Okay, and this is the last one of the true or false. God ordered the killing of women and children.
God ordered the killing of women and children. No, I think that we have to go back and look at exactly what the context was in that situation. So I could expand on that if you'd like, but I don't know if you want to do this in this rapid fire session.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's just like whether you believe that or not. Now, the next one is not really about the Bible at all, but you see that chart in front of you?
Yes.
So again, this is your opinions. There's no right or wrong answer. So strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. I'm going to make, I think, 10 statements here, and you just tell me where you fit on that chart. Something is true if everyone agrees to it.
Disagree.
Okay. Some beliefs should not be questioned.
Disagree.
You know, there's also a strongly disagree there too, right?
I'll just say.
Okay. Believing something that is false feels just like believing something that is true.
Neutral.
Okay. Feelings are a reliable way to come to true conclusions.
Neutral.
It is important that your beliefs are true.
Strongly agree.
It is okay to believe something that is false if it gives you comfort.
Disagree.
It is better to, by default, believe a claim than not to believe it.
It is better by default to believe a claim than not to believe it. Well, I think we certainly need to look at exactly what the claim is. So I don't want to answer that unless I know what the claim is. So if you want to get specific, I'll certainly answer it that way.
Okay, let's say do you golf?
Yes.
Okay.
Not much. I'm not good.
So,
I'm actually pretty horrible, but yes, I like golf.
I'm the same way. I'm not that great. However, what if I told you that I can drive the golf ball off the tee 1,000 yards, 10 out of 10 times? You're
better than John Daly. You're better than Tiger Woods.
Right.
You're pretty damn good.
Yeah. Would you believe that claim by default?
Would you believe I have some oceanfront property in Arizona to sell you?
There you go. So, but I agree with you. It depends on the claim. Because if I told you I had a car, you'd probably that might be okay to believe that by default. But next one: someone is justified in their beliefs until someone or something proves them wrong.
If sure. Well, it's just like, for example, let's go into the flat Earth situation. So someone is justified in believing in flat Earth until we were very much proven that that was wrong. So that's true. Agree.
Okay. It is possible to be certain of something yet still mistaken.
Agree.
I am comfortable with saying I don't know.
Agree.
It is beneficial to find out when I'm wrong about something.
Agree.
If I have reliable information that falsifies one of my beliefs, I will abandon it.
Agree.
It is important to me to be completely certain of my beliefs.
Agree.
I look for more disconfirming information before I accept something as true.
Agree.
It is possible that some of my most deeply held beliefs are not true.
It's possible. Agree.
Okay. That was my rapid fire questions.
Very good. You've done some homework. You actually prepared for this quite well, didn't you?
Actually, with
good.
The last one, like with the chart here, I got to give props to a guy named Ben Diesel. He came up with that mostly, and I thought it was really...
Ben Diesel? Is that like Vin Diesel?
No, not Vin Diesel. Ben Diesel. But so when we talked a long time ago about you coming onto my channel, you asked what would we talk about, and I said, well, 1 Peter 3:15, reasons for the hope that you have. So how would you answer that question? Why are you a Christian?
That's a good question. It's a little bit of a story. Can I give you the story?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was raised as a Roman Catholic. I was raised in the Catholic Church. I went to I went through the whole thing. I went to a private school, private Catholic school from kindergarten through 8th grade. And then my freshman year in high school, I went to a Catholic high school. But it was all girls and I didn't like it. So I begged my parents to switch me and I switched over to a public school and I liked that much better. So I ended up going to public universities and doing that kind of stuff. I went to a couple different universities before graduating. And then I went into my 20s and my family was rather disgusted, to put it mildly, at what was going on in the Catholic Church. And we're seeing it today, even in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and different places right now. But my family was quite upset with what was going on. And so my dad sort of has always been the leader in the family. And he sort of started the charge of this just isn't right. We should just all leave the church. And I thought that seemed like a pretty good decision. And everybody in my family did. My 2 brothers, my mom, and I all pretty much left the church. And, every once in a while I'd go back to the church for out of a fluke, whether it's a marriage or it was a baptism or something like that. But I really wasn't following the Catholic faith. And in my early 20s, I decided to abandon it. And that was even though I'd had some experiences in college that brought me closer to God, I still chose that way. So I don't know why I did that, but I did that. And so my sister was the only one who stayed in the church, and she's still faithful to the Catholic Church. But for a couple of decades, I wandered about, and just I considered myself spiritual, and I considered myself a Christian, but I wasn't sure about Jesus's resurrection, and I really wasn't sure about whole Christianity altogether. I thought that the more interesting faiths and the more enlightening faiths were faiths that were steeped in the Eastern religions. And so I started investigating those, and I started looking at the Buddhist faiths and Hinduism and other things like that. And I read books by the Dalai Lama and by Deepak Chopra and by James Redfield and just a number of different books that were out of the Eastern sort of faiths. And I started thinking that was the way to go. And I was very much a Wayne Dyer fan. And Wayne Dyer is what I would call a spiritualist who is kind of exactly where I was standing as far as I considered myself very spiritual and that sort of thing. And then at the same time I was working, and I was working in a family business, and I was selling real estate on the side. I had my real estate license that I earned a long time ago, and so I used to do that on the side. And for personal reasons, I didn't want to take that full time, and I don't want to go down that path. But I had a scare when I was in college of someone waiting in the back of my car, so I just didn't want to drive around people I didn't know, and so I never went into real estate full time for that reason. But anyway, I was doing real estate.
You had a guy in the back of your car, like for real?
Yeah, he tried to kill me. So, but I got away. So, but
Wow.
that was when I guess I'll explain that real fast. But let's just say, so I was holding down 3 jobs. I was working in a family business, selling real estate on the side just to friends. And I was writing articles for the local newspaper. They were actually paying me to write articles about real estate. So I was studying the real estate market, and I was writing articles about that. And my husband was in, or at that time he was my boyfriend, but my boyfriend was he was a general contractor. And so I was also writing articles for the newspaper about construction and that industry. And so I was publishing stuff like that. And that's where I felt that I was really enjoying myself much more than doing real estate and much more than being in my family furniture business. So I wanted to get away from that in the back of my mind. But going back to what happened in college. So in college, in my senior year, a lot of us were out. It was at night, and everyone decided we were going to go to a place called Lakeside, which is in Boca Raton, right on Glades Road, and that's where I lived at the time. And so Boca Raton, Florida. So I said, we were all wearing jeans, and I said, well, I'm going to run home and change into these pants so we can get in this place, because it was a fancy place and we were only able to wear pants. So I ran home and left everybody, and I said, I'll meet you there. So I came back, and at that time I had a Volkswagen Cabriolet, which was like the triple white little convertible thing. And so I pulled into the parking lot at Lakeside, and I was in my car. I got out of the car. I started walking up to the line at Lakeside, and I noticed the line was really long, and I thought, what am I doing here? This is just stupid. I'm just going to go home. So I went and I got back into my car. But as I was getting into the car, and I was sitting in the front seat, I looked to my side and I saw glass all over the floor. And I thought, now that is weird. Why is there glass all over the floor? I know that there wasn't glass on the floor when I drove up. And so I looked, and as I'm doing this, this hand came out from behind me and held me, pinned me back to the back of the seat, and it's kind of pinning my head. And I was freaked out. I still had the door open though, and I still had my foot out the door. And so I started trying to stall, and he's like, shut up. And I said, well, what do you want? What do you want? And he's like, just shut up, And so I just broke free. Like every little piece of energy I had, I tore out of there, and I ran into. Well, I don't know, but let me tell you what he did have. He had something that broke. What he did was, it was a Volkswagen. It had a little triangle window up in the front, and he actually first tried to stab the top of the Volkswagen. It was a soft top. He tried to stab that first, and then he must have given up on that. So there's a little hole there, and then he broke the window, this little triangle window, which was what the glass I saw was, and he stuck his hand in there and opened the door. Now this is in the late 80s. Now I've just aged myself. I don't care though. It was in the late 80s, so these were these older cars, and so that's what he did. And so he was sitting in the back seat. And he was waiting for me. And then, so I ran into the parking lot, and I found some other guys, and I was screaming and yelling, and I'm like, someone's in that car trying to, all this stuff, trying to get me. And I had scratches on my face, and he, cause he kind of like scratched it as I was ripping away. I had and so, and it was like a red, but, anyway, so I was yelling, and this little crowd of guys, and then suddenly I see this guy walking out. And he said, someone help her. And I recognized the voice, and I said, that's him, And so these people I was with chased this guy, and he ran into a silver Porsche and got away. And so I went and reported that the next day.
Did they ever catch him?
No, well, here's the scary part. I reported it the next day, and nothing came of it. And years passed, and I always wondered what happened. And I ended up having a roommate in Boca in my late 20s, and a female roommate, and she was an old Boca person, knew a lot of people in Boca. And I told her this story, and she said, boy, that sounds, and I'm going to name the person. I don't even care if I name him. She said, that sounds an awful lot like, actually, I don't know if I should name him. Oh, what the hell. So that sounds an awful lot like David Miller. And David Miller was a black sheep of a family in Boca, a wealthy family. He had a silver Porsche at the time, and he was in prison at the time when she mentioned this, and he had raped and murdered a bunch of women. So I don't know where he is right now. He's probably still in prison. So when she told me that, I again called the police department and gave my story over again. And they said, all they asked for, it was kind of funny, all they asked for was they're like, well, what do you look like? And I'm like, well, I said, I'm blonde, whatever. They're like, how tall are you? How much do you weigh? How much did you weigh at the time? That kind of thing. And that was all they cared about. And they said I fit the profile of exactly the type of woman that he had been busy raping and murdering. So,
wow.
So yeah, that was, it's a kind of traumatic, but because of that,
do you think this had a part to play in your becoming a Christian?
No, it really, that had a part to play in me not becoming a full-time realtor, because I didn't trust, and I still don't trust. I will not walk into a house with a stranger. I refuse. I had friends who were robbed at gunpoint selling real estate, or who, whose cars were taken away from them as they were selling real estate. So I never could go into that field that I know would be quite lucrative, because I was scared. So
this might sound strange, but are you okay with giving you don't have to give the real name, but are you okay giving the name of one of your best friends?
Sure.
Like, just throw out a name. It doesn't have to be the real name. Just throw out a name.
One of my best friends. Let me think of which best friend I should be thinking of in the back of my mind. I'm trying to think of why we're going to do this. Okay, I can think of a name.
Just give me a name. What name?
Barbara.
Barbara. Okay. I'm asking Barbara now, why is SJ a Christian? What would Barbara say?
Oh, well, Barbara's a college friend. I better go into another recent friend. I wasn't, I better go into somebody I know right now. So I'm going to say Bella.
Okay, Bella. I'm talking to Bella right now. Bella, why is SJ a Christian?
SJ, and actually that continues my story. So what happened was in 9/11. So Bella would know about 9/11. So 9/11 occurred, and as you know, everything with the World Trade Center occurred, and a lot of us had these sort of epiphanies at that time, and I had an epiphany at 9/11, and I said to myself, I'm not doing what I want to do in life. I'm working these 3 jobs, and I don't really like any of them, except I do like the publishing part. I don't really like what I'm doing. So I just, out of the blue, I had dated a guy for 5 years when I was in my, didn't work out, and it didn't work out because one of the reasons, he did not want me to go back and pursue an MBA, and I went back anyway. And so by the time 9/11 came about, I already had this degree, and I decided I would use it for improving myself. And so and I was trying to figure out which way to go. Should I go to a big company or do this or that? I happened to throw my.
Can you be Bella right now though? Like
She would say that I gave my, well, I decided at that time that, or she would say that I decided at that time that I wanted to do something different. And so I ended up working in a university, Lynn University, teaching a course, a marketing course. And I really enjoyed it. And so I decided I'd go back and get my PhD because I wanted to be taken more seriously in this role. And so I went back and earned that. And that time I still wasn't a Christian, but Bella would know that because she and I worked together. And so all of these years passed, and I was looking for a deeper purpose. And that's actually why I went back to earn my PhD. I wanted to find a deeper purpose and a deeper meaning in my life. I felt like I wasn't using everything that I'd been gifted with. And so
Bella, why did SJ choose Christianity to find deeper purpose and meaning in life?
Well, actually, Bella's Jewish. So
why did SJ choose Christianity to find deeper purpose and meaning in life? Bella.
Because she walked into a church and she had an experience that she felt led her back to Christ.
Okay, fair enough. And this experience was so powerful that, did SJ take to it right away? Did she have questions about it? Or was it basically that was the pivotal moment where there was no turning back? What would SJ say to that?
No, there was turning back. Can I answer as SJ? Because she doesn't know. I don't know if I've really articulated exactly my entire experience to a lot of my friends. I know I have to my sister, but you didn't ask for a sister. You asked for, so I haven't articulated this to, my husband would know. I mean, also he's another one, knows the whole experience.
Well, you don't have to tell me what this experience was exactly, but this experience that you had is you connected somehow to Jesus and Christianity. Is that correct?
It wasn't just one experience. It was a series. And actually I could have turned back after the church, and I actually kind of did. I was kind of wavering. Even after walking in the church and having this experience, I still was questioning. Even after getting baptized again, I got born again, baptized in September, I don't know, 6 years ago or so. I was born again at that time, but I still was wavering. I still, in the back of my mind, wasn't completely sold, even though I thought I was. I wanted to do everything I could do because I felt something different inside of me, but I wasn't sure. I was still questioning. I wasn't exactly sold 100%.
What weren't you sure about?
I was sure that in fact, in my entire life, I've always been sure that there's a higher power and there's a source of purpose and meaning, because I feel
but what weren't you sure about Christianity?
I wasn't 100% sure about Jesus's resurrection.
And for you, that's the most important part of Christianity?
Yes, I think that forms the foundation of Christianity.
Okay, and why weren't you sure about the resurrection of Jesus?
I hadn't accumulated proof. So at that point, I still, I wasn't someone who was, I was just new to the entire Bible. For many years, all I had was a teeny little New Testament that was given from my mother-in-law to my son when he was born. So I didn't have, and for many years, I wasn't following Christianity. I was really studying. I thought the Eastern faiths were more interesting. I had a few spiritual experiences and that sort of thing, but I still wasn't completely 100% sold. And it wasn't until It wasn't until I got onto a plane and I happened to be sitting next to a pastor who told me that he directed me to read C.S. Lewis's adult books. And then when I read C.S. Lewis's adult books, a lot clicked. And then I just became really passionate about learning more. And at that point, I started having more spiritual experiences, and I started learning more and understanding that the resurrection actually has a lot of backing. And I looked to a lot of the different people who found different reasons to support Christianity. I had a dream and a vision of my own, and I became closer, and it's really neat because it's actually made me a better person. Like, I'm actually nicer than I was, you know. As funny as that sounds, because I keep feeling, I mean, it's amazing when if you watch The Passion of the Christ, and you watch it with the view that, wow, look what this man did for me, and he didn't just do it for me. Look what this man did for everyone.
Do you think you were searching for the proof of Jesus' resurrection because of the experiences that you had?
I think it was all part of one big package. So I was having experiences. I wanted to understand those better. I wanted to understand the context behind, for example, why I had a vision when of Jesus. Actually, it was in the date. I looked up and I saw when I was sitting in a house. I looked up. It was as if into the sky, and I could see this vision of Christ. And so I had that once, and I had a dream once that was very instructive. And so,
how did you figure out that what you experienced was based on something outside yourself?
Well, that's a good question. I think that goes to what C.S. Lewis said, and actually one thing that I learned from the book Mere Christianity that I think is really important is we realize that we have a moral compass. And it's kind of interesting because we say, you know, all of humanity has this moral compass and this natural desire to do what's right and to be kind and to be just and to be empathetic, to appreciate humility, to appreciate love, truth, all these kind of things. And C.S. Lewis sort of pointed out, why is that? You know, we could easily have gone the other way.
I understand, but how did you figure out that, like, this moral compass and this God could still exist, but your experience of that vision could still have been false, not based on something outside yourself? How did you figure out that vision, that experience you had, actually corresponded with this God that you believe in?
Well, the vision that I had, and I kept questioning the particular vision because I had that early on, and I actually, to be honest, I don't remember the exact. I wish I plotted down a timeline when all of this stuff happened, but I didn't. But I know that I had this vision that was. I looked up and I saw a couple of figures in like a window in the sky, and that. It was in the back of my mind, and I thought maybe I imagined it. You know, you always think maybe you imagined it, maybe this didn't really happen. And then I had a dream, and I was doing things in my life, and Jesus basically gave me some instructions on how to live better in the dream. In the dream, what happened was I was in a big group of people at my mother-in-law's house, and all of a sudden in the center of the room was standing Jesus. And he was dressed like in a robe and that kind of thing. And everyone was drinking and partying and having a good time. And, you know, just everybody's laughing and joking around just as you would do with socializing in a neighborhood. It was kind of like a block party. And we were all just laughing and having a good time. And all of a sudden, the crowd was completely silent in my dream. And everyone was looking into the middle of the room. And Jesus said, you know, it's time to be serious. It's time to do what you've been called to do, and something like that. I mean, he didn't say those exact words. I don't remember the exact words that he said, but something to that effect.
SJ, I understand you had these experiences, but remember when I was asking you these questions about strongly agree, neutral? I asked you, is it beneficial to find out when you're wrong about something? And you said agree. How did you figure out, or what did you do to find out if you were wrong about this vision and what you attributed it to?
I didn't. I actually, what I did with the vision is I sat on it, and it's still right there. It's still, and it could be wrong. Okay. I'm not saying it's not, there's nothing that I could do to prove it right or wrong at this point. It's still just an experience that occurred, and it's kept in that role of being an experience that occurred. And how I interpret that is basically to try to learn more. So, let me share with you one reason why you asked about, let me just give you a more recent reason why I feel that Christianity is the faith that I think that people should consider. If you consider the fact that if we have an all-loving, all-benevolent higher power, and going back to C.S. Lewis and talking about the fact that we're all trying to do what's right, we're all trying to do what's loving, if we have this all-loving, all-merciful, all-just power, and every religion would desire to have an all-just, all-merciful, all-loving power. Certainly, the Muslims would like to say that Allah's like that. The Hindus would like to say that their gods are like that. Other faiths that have different gods, like Thor or whatever it is, would like to say that their God is all-loving, all-powerful. So Christians also would say our God is all-loving and all-powerful and all-just. But if you were to take and reconcile the idea of being both all-just and all-merciful, these are incompatible. Okay, so that doesn't work. You can't be all just and actually punishing everyone for what they do, and also concurrently all merciful because you're forgiving people for what they do. The only way to reconcile that is through the death of Jesus Christ, because he actually gave up his life for our sins, and that reconciled the fact that we should be punished for our sins. He opened the door to us, and actually that's why Christianity makes the most sense out of all of the other faiths.
Can something make sense to you and still be false?
Well, sure.
Okay, so how did you figure out that what you just said is true, that Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead?
That's a good question. So one of the reasons that I thought that this made a lot of sense, and actually one of the first reasons, was when I took a look at the experience of Saul and Paul. So Saul is on the road, and he was here's what happened. So Jesus died. The apostles went into hiding. Peter denied him 3 times, and they were all hiding in a house. And then what happened was Jesus came back to life and appeared to them. And first he appeared to some women. First he appeared to Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene was told by Jesus to go inform everyone. And so then,
SJ, most of my listeners right now, we're all well familiar with the story. Maybe there's a few who are not, but shame on you if you don't know the Gospels, those listening and watching right now. But so are you saying that one of the reasons you believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead is because of the experience of Paul on the road on the Damascus road?
Yes.
Okay, so how did you figure out that experience of Paul was something that actually happened outside himself?
Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe that Paul was in existence?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, do you believe that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians 15?
Yes.
Do you believe that 1 Corinthians 15 was written within 5 years of when Jesus was crucified?
No.
Okay, do you believe that 1 Corinthians 15 was a creed that was practiced and said repeatedly in the churches within the first 5 years of Jesus' crucifixion?
No, there's just a few lines that are a creed.
Okay, so but 1 Corinthians 15 is actually known, and it's recognized by, as you said, mainstream scholars for having been the oldest creed that's in the New Testament. And from many mainstream scholars, it was something that was memorized and put down on paper in the first 5 years following Jesus' crucifixion. So
what is a creed in your mind?
It's a memorized passage. So it was something that's memorized, that's a belief. So it was a belief that everyone held. And in the 1 Corinthians 15 basically said that Jesus appeared. What's that?
Are all memorized beliefs true?
Well, are all memorized. Well, why don't I share what that one? Can I share what 1 Corinthians 15 says?
I'm familiar, but you can if you want. Yeah.
Okay, because I think that that's important. Let me just bring it up here. Hold on one second. Because Paul, now Paul was a Pharisee who was ready to go murder people, and he changed his mind. And it was mentioned 3 times in the book of Acts, which was written by Luke, who also traveled with Paul starting in Acts 15. But basically, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received, and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. For what I received, I passed on to you of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me, as to one abnormally born. So that particular verse was something that was...
How did you figure out that was true?
Well, I think that you can figure out... How did I figure out that that was true? I figured it out by using what I would say is just common sense. So I looked at the experiences of the way that the apostles turned around out of hiding and actually chose to go worship Jesus illegally and risked their lives over decades. And many of them were stoned, they were beaten, they were crucified,
so
they were torched.
Yeah, I understand.
They were.
Good. Now let me do the outsider test of faith.
But I just want to say, so those experiences to me tell me that I should look at those experiences and just look at the message that they were saying, because they actually, unlike martyrs today, these martyrs had the opportunity firsthand to know if what they believed was the truth.
Can somebody say that they know something and be mistaken?
Somebody could say they know something and be mistaken. Would a group of people risk their lives for decades knowing that what they believe is mistaken? Now, I would say in this particular case, no.
They don't know that they're mistaken. They believe that
Well, they had the... Well, now, let me ask you this, Doug. Why do you think they would do what they did?
And what's that exactly?
Why do you think that they would be willing to turn around from going out of hiding? Peter denied Jesus 3 times. They turned around from hiding and they decided to go out and preach for decades, risked being crucified. Paul was beheaded by Nero in 62. We had lots of experiences. Now, why did Paul do what he did? What's your thought on that?
Well,
was it for money?
No, because they really believed it.
Okay, so if they really believed it, did they have any reason to believe?
We don't know.
Well, did they have reason not to believe? Would you say their reason not to believe would be superior to their reason to believe?
SJ, slow down a little bit here. Now, I think, you tell me where you disagree with me. Not all creeds are true, or not all beliefs are true. I think you agree with me.
Correct.
Okay. Paul cites a creed. We don't know if that creed is true. You agree? Disagree?
So we want to look at the situation of Paul citing the creed. So we want to find out exactly what Paul was saying. Is that reasonable?
Right.
Let me ask you this, Doug. If I could, I know you're asking me a lot of questions, but I think I should at least be able to give you one. Do you think that the apostles had more reasons not to believe than they had to believe? I mean, would it have been to their benefit not to believe versus to believe?
How do you know that that what we think who the apostles are actually existed?
Well, I think that you have also decided that Paul is a real person. I don't know a single scholar, even the atheists such as Richard Carrier, who would say that Paul didn't exist.
I agree.
And Paul directly referenced in 1 Corinthians 15 the other apostles. He mentioned specifically Cephas and James, for example. And he also traveled with Luke starting in Acts, and we know that because Luke started referring to himself in the first person. So there's another reference to another apostle. We also know that Paul also mentioned and made reference to Mark in his epistles. He also mentioned Mark, who wrote Mark, or who was credited with writing Mark, and Mark and Peter were very close. So I think that we have very good reason, just piecing from the one piece of information that you have that Paul is true, Paul is in existence. Now we take a look at exactly what Paul
SJ,
wrote,
SJ,
and I think we're good.
I think the basic problem or difference between you and I is our epistemologies, what we view as good evidence to believe certain claims. So I'm going to take this off the Bible for a second, and I have a feeling you're going to see this as a trap. And you know what? If you see it as a trap, embrace the trap. But just hear me out here for a second, because I think we actually agree if we take this off the Bible for a second. I'll use the one I've used in the past. My great-great-great-grandfather had a 40-foot tall fire-breathing dragon. I'm not joking, SJ. I'm not joking. My great-great-great-great-grandfather had a 40-foot dragon that breathed fire. How do I know this? Because 15 years after my great-great-great-great-grandfather died, there was a diary found from a guy named Paul Jacobson, I think his name was. And he wrote a creed about my great-great-great-great-grandfather's 40-foot fire-breathing dragon. Should we believe it based on that creed? No. And you know what? He goes further. He talks about 3, 4, 5 people who also saw this fire-breathing dragon. Would that be enough to convince you that my great-great-great-great-grandfather had a 40-foot fire-breathing dragon?
Well, let me ask you this, Doug. Does anyone admire that 40-foot fire-breathing dragon today?
I'm sure we could find some. Yeah, it's a small, cohesive group.
Would we be able to find maybe a couple billion people who admire that 40-foot dragon today?
Oh, is truth based on popularity?
Well, I can say that if we go back to the early Christians in the year 313, we had between 5 and 6 million people who were worshiping Jesus, Christianity, illegally. Before Constantine decided to legalize it, we had between 5 and 6 million people, many of whom risked their lives. Now, it was interspersed. It wasn't like constant persecution going on in the first few hundred years. But we definitely had groups of people through time in the first 300 years when Christianity was a peaceful religion. We didn't have...
Does the number of adherents make a claim more or less likely to be true?
Well, if I look at your claim of this 40-foot dragon and we can't find a single person besides you who believes it, or maybe a few other people who are relatives of your grandfather, your great-great-great-grandfather, well, I would say that we have a stronger claim.
Hey, SJ,
certainly that's...
When earlier in this live stream, I asked you, something is true if everyone agrees to it. And then I put up this little chart, and you said disagree. So
right.
The
number, and I was referencing, you know what I was... Okay, sorry.
Yeah, the number of people who believe something, I don't think, especially if we're not talking about experts, we're just talking about just people believing stuff. Like, there's 2.2 billion Christians in the world, and I think there's 1.8 billion Muslims. Does that mean
Muslims?
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. Does that mean that Islam is 95% as true as Christianity? Of course not. That's ridiculous, right?
Islam has a lot of flaws. I mean, Islam refers to the Old Testament as something, as a source of information for Islam, but yet it refers also to the Old Testament as being invalid. Islam refers to Jesus as not have been crucified. Some other person, some of them think some other person was crucified. I mean, there's some reasons why I don't, I question the validity of Islam.
I think I know where you're coming from, and tell me, let's try to find a point of agreement. I think for you, the evidence of the resurrection is based upon the reliability of the evidence of the New Testament. Would you agree?
Well, that's actually a really good point, because we also have a number of extra biblical sources. So aside from the
stay
fact
on that,
we have...
Do you agree with my statement that for you,
No, I don't. Let me say, I agree that is one component
good.
of my beliefs.
Okay, now
one component.
Other components
so that is one.
Is
another
Josephus
component
and
is the
Tacitus and so forth. Okay, now
Antonius.
One thing, and there's no way I could ever convince you. I don't think that the New Testament isn't reliable, or that these extra biblical sources may not be what you think it is. But one thing I've noticed is with you, you'll post things on Twitter without ever giving the other side of things. Is that fair, or do you give the other side of things? It's always you're trying to uplift, uphold, defend, rather than say, but here's reasons to doubt it. Have you ever done that? Maybe you have, and I just haven't seen it. Like,
Well, let me ask you this, Doug. Have you ever posted stuff on Twitter? And I just looked down your timeline. The last few weeks, I've been looking at your timeline periodically. And have you ever said, "Hey, here's this, and here's some reasons to believe"?
I'm not very active on Twitter at all, but I have tons of live stream where I said, hey, there very well could be a God. And then I think one time I've said what really kind of makes me wonder maybe there's a God is child prodigies. That for some reason that gets me. It's not so much the sunset or the other things that people find. But yeah, I have been very open, very transparent. Because of my family situation, part of me desires that Christianity is true. That would make my life easier. I am
I did watch you know what I have to say real quick. I did watch your thing about I've seen a few of your YouTube videos, and I did see one where you were talking about your wife and how she's a Christian and you're not, and so I did find that kind of amusing.
Yeah,
only because that would be a challenge.
Yeah, she married a Christian, and 18 years into marriage, she lost her Christian husband to the death of reason, I guess. I mean, it's just I started
But what happened? I mean, just because I know nothing about you, why did you decide that all of a sudden, out of all these years passed by, and you said, "It's
Great
done.
question.
I'm done, Chris, no more"?
What happened is exactly the question I just asked you, just like 2 minutes ago. That I started asking myself, what are reasons to not believe this? What are people saying who disagree with me? How can I better understand where they're coming from? Why could it be the case that there were no eyewitnesses to Jesus' resurrection? Is that actually possible? What would Christianity look like today if Jesus had not risen from the dead, but we still have people claiming that he did? Would it look any different? And I started asking those deep questions to myself. But I think the first step, since I was raised fundamentalist, is saying to myself, I'm willing to go to hell. I am willing to go to hell because I value truth so much. So that fear for you, I think it's meaning and purpose. For me, the way I was raised, it was hell. I was willing to risk it all. Most people are not willing to do that. They just fear hell so much, or they love Jesus so much they just can't. I don't want to make Jesus sad, so they don't want to question Jesus. For you, I think it's meaning and purpose, and that you don't want to risk losing that. But until you are willing to risk losing all your meaning, all your purpose, and never ever getting it back, I know this sounds so harsh.
I can't wait to talk to you.
Then I think you can actually start to look at the evidence clearly and objectively. But the good news is that you can still have meaning and purpose without this God concept. And again, I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. He very might well exist. But just like you found more joy and more peace, and you probably feel you're a better person now than before, I'm the same way. I have more joy, more peace, but yet I left Christianity. You went to Christianity. So here we have an example of two people who are so different, you and I. We're probably close to the same age.
Probably.
Yeah. I'm 40. How old am I?
I'm up there.
I'm in my late 40s. So when I was asking you about when you post things on Twitter or on your blog, things like the dating of the Gospels, that's something we just talked about recently. Like, are you aware that mainstream scholars disagree with you? And why not tell your listeners, your readers, your followers this? I take a minority position. I think the Gospels were written all before 70 AD, or maybe not John. Tell your readers that. Because there's
Well, no, what I did, Doug, is, and I know you saw the link that I posted. I actually posted a link that included both conservative views, which would date the Gospels earlier, and it also included the liberal views, which date the Gospels later. So that link that I posted included both. I was being fair to both.
right, but would you be willing to say publicly that your belief on things like the dating of the Gospels is not mainstream?
No, because I don't think that you can say that one side is mainstream and the other one's not. Now we have two camps. It's kind of like looking at Republicans and Democrats. We have two groups of people. The liberal view tends to think that it's later, and the conservative view tends to think it's earlier. So you just have two camps. So if you present both camps, I think that's more fair than trying to assume that one camp is the mainstream and the other camp is not, because I can find lots of mainstream scholars in the conservative camp. So there are different people in the conservative camp who would date it earlier. So it's just fair. I think it's fair, and it would be exclusionary to try to pretend only the liberals are the mainstream scholars. I don't think that's a fair case to present.
I'm not talking liberal. There's even, I think you would consider conservatives Christian scholars like Craig Evans, Gary Habermas. Mike Lacona. They don't date the Gospels pre-70 AD. Maybe Mark at 65, 68-ish, but most of them past that.
Well, I listed them in the link that I connected, that I had a lot of people with different views who are all scholars, and some of them voted earlier dates and some had later dates. So I don't think it's, and I really, to be honest, doesn't really matter. They had an oral tradition back then and they memorized words, and it was very prized that people were able to specifically memorize things really well. And so that particular tradition is something that's different than today. I mean, it
doesn't matter.
You know, even if you were able to have such a skill, and they did in those days, to be able to memorize passages and pass down the memorization of oral history, it's just different than how we live today. We don't memorize like that. But wait, let me ask you this before we go down the whole dating the Gospels thing. I want to go back to what you said, because I think it's fascinating, something you said.
Okay.
You said you don't mind if I misquote you, please correct me. You said you don't mind if you lost all meaning and all purpose, and you would risk going to hell. Do you think that do you think it's easier to be a Christian believer these days than to not be a Christian believer? Do you think that you have an easier path that you've chosen over, say, your wife's path that she's chosen to be a Christian follower? Do you think it's, is it easier to be a Christian, or is it easier to be a non-Christian in today's society, would you say?
In the United States?
Correct.
I think it's easier to be a Christian.
Why do you think that?
Because I have a 15-year-old daughter who went to school, and kids, and not just one, several kids came up to her and other kids and say, "Are you a Christian? Are you a Christian? Yes, good. Are you a Christian? Yes, good." Then they get to my daughter. "Are you a Christian?" She's not a Christian. Everybody's watching. Can you imagine the peer pressure there? Most of her friends are Christians. And for her to say no, she came home devastated. So don't tell me in the United States it's easier to be an atheist than a Christian. Christianity is rampant, especially in certain states of this. California and New York may be exceptions.
That's fair enough. And you're right. Actually, I've seen studies where they've correlated happiness to whether or not you're consistent with the prevailing beliefs in your society. So if you're in a society like the United States, where the vast majority of people are Christian, then it probably would be difficult. And certainly that goes against, say, the Coptic Egyptians, who are suffering, and many of them were beheaded not too long ago by Muslims for their faith. So there's certain places in the world where people are still being persecuted for being Christian. But I think my point, and I think what I mean to say is, and probably, there are a lot of Christians out there who they don't really walk the walk. They show up at church on Sunday, and then for the next 6 days they go and they act as if they weren't even Christian at all. It's just sort of how they are. That's how I was probably for many years. But I think if you're a Christian that really embraces the idea you're supposed to bear your own cross and you're supposed to take a lot of time in your day to devote to Jesus, I think that might make it a little more difficult than not believing if you actually adhere to the practices that Jesus called on you to do.
But did I answer your question?
In my view, yeah, you did. Actually, that's a good answer. That's a good answer. And I feel bad for your daughter that she had to go through that. And I know my kids are about the same age. I have a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I know peer pressure right now is significant. So,
but let me now answer against myself, because I think it's good to give the opposite side. There are huge. I think there's advantages to being an atheist, and so in that aspect, me being an atheist is easier than my wife. And I don't think, actually not compared to my wife, but compared to some other Christians. Some Christians struggle. They struggle and struggle every day to keep their thoughts captive to Christ. They feel tremendous guilt when they lust for a woman, when a lot of times they have no control. I shouldn't use the word lust, being just initially attracted. I think a lot of this turmoil is for naught, that they're putting themselves through something that they don't have to. I think there's a lot of Christians who might be listening right now who have doubts, and they struggle deeply because of these doubts. They feel guilty that they have these doubts, but they're so terrified of either hell or losing meaning and purpose. They're terrified that they won't have that Jesus concept there with them day and night. They're terrified that they'll lose meaning and purpose, that they'll cheat on their taxes. They are almost paralyzed. And there's some Christians, right? I see that hand. There's a Christian listening to me right now. I can see it. Who's saying, yes, Doug, you're describing me. I do doubt, but I'm not willing to give it up because they need it. There's a psychological fulfillment there. But I want to get back to, I really hate playing whack-a-mole. And when I asked you why you're a Christian, it came down to visions, experiences, and the proof, you used the word proof, of the resurrection of Jesus. And when it came to the proof of the resurrection, and you admitted that your visions and experiences could not be based on something in reality or external to yourself. So then
one of them, let me go back. There's one experience, and I don't want to get too detailed in my experiences, but
I'll grant you that. I'll grant you that. There's one of them that you might say you have proof. But my point is that when you base at least part of your proofs on the reliability of the New Testament, because you mentioned 1 Corinthians 15 and so forth, then just like we did earlier when I asked you that is it beneficial to find out when you're wrong about something, you said you agreed to that. And when I asked you if I have reliable information that falsifies one of my beliefs, I will abandon it. You agreed to that. And I said, when I asked you, I look for more disconfirming information before I accept something as true. I think you agreed to that. So now when I bring up this, because it's all about the reliability of the Bible, really, if you want proof of the resurrection of Jesus, this is from the Oxford Annotated Bible, page 1744. Neither the evangelists nor their first readers engaged in historical analysis. In other words, what this is saying is, when you read the Gospels, you're not reading a history book. Their aim was to confirm Christian faith, Luke 1:4, John 20-31. This is the Oxford Annotated Bible. This is a well-respected resource for New Testament scholarship. Scholars generally agree that the Gospels were written 40 to 60 years after the death of Jesus. 40 add 33 is 73. The Gospels thus do not present eyewitness or contemporary accounts of Jesus' life and teachings. So now if you're saying that I believe this is proof that a man rose from the dead based on non-eyewitness accounts, non-contemporary accounts, non-historical analysis, with a goal of confirming Christian faith, which some might call that propaganda, we have good reason to at least doubt it. Would you agree?
Well, let me talk to something that I think is incorrect that's in the statement from Oxford there. There's a couple of things that I think are incorrect. One is they didn't reference the fact that we do have portions of the Bible, for example, 1 Corinthians 15, that are well known and well accepted to have been passed down from much earlier time, from within 5 years of Jesus' crucifixion. And that's actually a key statement, 1 Corinthians 15. A second thing that this isn't that I haven't mentioned before was the 330 prophecies that Jesus was able to fulfill in the New Testament. But a third very important item I'd like to mention is the fact that Luke, who wrote the book of Luke and the book of Acts. Luke was a doctor, but Luke was also recognized by a person called Sir William Ramsay. And Sir William Ramsay was an archaeologist who set out to discount the Bible. He set out to discount the New Testament in the late 1800s, and he came back after spending years in the in the Near East, in the areas in which Jesus had been living and had his ministry. He spent years searching for information to disprove the New Testament. And after studying the whole thing and studying all of the historical documents and all of the facts and all of the archaeology that he could put up, he said that Luke was beyond a doubt one of the most amazing historians of ancient times. And he thought that the meticulous approach that Luke used was quite impressive. And so I think that what the Oxford Annotated Bible said right there was actually inaccurate, because it said that no one, the evangelists of the time, it said that no one was historical. And clearly we have even a modern day, relatively modern day historian / archaeologist who went back and really admired the work that Luke did in the New Testament.
Okay, you're free to disagree with the Oxford Annotated Bible, but this is a compiled book from professionals in their field, so you can just say, I disagree with the professionals who know this stuff better than I do. You're free to do that.
Well, no, I could also go back, and I've got a couple of books I'll show here. So I've got a book called The Dictionary, Jesus and the Gospels, and this is also written by several experts who also claim different dating. I also have this book right here. I've got a ton of books, but this is another book that I happen to have upstairs with me. This one is Evidence That Supports a Verdict, and this is by Josh and Sean McDowell, who are very well known and a very, very well studied book. In fact, Josh McDowell, who's the father of Sean, wrote the initial version of this back in the 1970s. And if you go through it, they've made very specific references to all sorts of historical pieces of information that support the New Testament, Jesus. It mentions extra biblical materials. It mentions the thousands of papyri that were discovered within
and if Josh McDowell was here right now, and if I was to look him in the eye and say, I want you to tell me the truth, Josh, tell me the truth. Is what you believe about, let's say, the dating of the Gospels, is it with mainstream consensus or against it? You know what he would say? Maybe not publicly, but he would say, yeah, I'm taking a minority view.
Well, what's really nice about the McDowells and that they do in this book is they actually present all of the views, and they do something that you would appreciate that. So in this great book, and I'll just show it again in case anyone wants to see it. But in this great book, what's really nice is, for example, they'll even talk about young Earth creationism. Here's a view from young Earth creationists. Here's a view from old Earth creationists. Here's another view. So they present multiple views so that people can actually read it within their own lens and adapt their own perspective. And it's truly an amazing book.
Let's go back to rapid fire here for a bit. If the Gospels were dated, if it were true, if the Gospels were dated post 70 AD, would you be more confident or less confident in the resurrection of Jesus?
I don't think that's really a major factor there, Doug. I don't. I wish I did. If I thought that was a big deal, I would admit it. I don't really think that in an oral tradition. I mean, if we didn't put it this way. These days, would I be able to prove, like, for example, if Martin Luther King was shot in 1968, okay? Were we around when Martin Luther King was shot in 1968? No, but could we prove that Martin Luther King was shot in 1968? I mean, if you weren't around in the time that Martin Luther King was shot, or the time that John F. Kennedy was shot in 1963, actually, what's really interesting, John F. Kennedy was shot on the exact same day as Aldous Huxley and C.S. Lewis. But anyway, would we be able to prove that? I mean, could I prove that to anyone that this happened if I weren't born at that time? Could I possibly put that together right now?
History is about what probably happened in the past. It's about probabilities. And the further we go back in history, the harder it is to get a high probability. But that being said, there are certain claims that require more evidence than other claims, different levels of evidence. Would you agree with that?
That actually is a great point. Do you believe that Socrates existed?
Sure. But whether he did or not, is irrelevant to the Socratic method.
Do you believe that Jesus walked the earth? Do you believe a man named Jesus walked the earth and was crucified?
Yeah, I believe it's more likely than not, yes. Keep going. Ask rapid fire questions of me. Keep going.
Do you believe Confucius existed?
I don't know.
Do you believe Alexander the Great existed?
Yes.
Do you believe Pontius Pilate existed?
Yes.
Do you believe Herod existed, Herod the Great?
Yes.
Okay, that's fair enough. So you're able to take some of the historical people that we've learned of in the past, and you would say that it's fair to say that they existed.
Now let's reverse it. Ready? Do you believe I have a car?
No. I'm just kidding. Do you believe if you have a car? I would guess the probability is high but I don't know which town you live in. Now, if you lived in New York City, I would probably say that you don't have a car because most people I know who live in New York City don't have a car. So I have no idea where you live. You live in Arizona? Yeah, you probably have a car.
Okay. Do you believe
It's highly likely you have a car.
Do you believe I own a nuclear missile?
No.
Why? Why did you believe I own a car but not a nuclear missile?
Well, because I don't think you'd be here with me on this channel if you owned a nuclear missile. I think that you would be behind bars. I think so. I don't think we would be having this nice conversation.
Do you believe I own a spaceship that can go from star to star?
No.
Why not?
I don't think you're independent. I don't think you're independently wealthy that way. I do think if you were to ask me what someone like Elon Musk might own, that there's a higher probability that Elon Musk would own a spaceship than there would be that you would own a spaceship.
No, I mean,
or let me just say a rocket.
A spaceship that can go from star to star.
Oh, star to star. I'm sorry, I wasn't really okay. So you can land on the stars. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Do you believe I have that?
Yeah. No.
Why not?
Your spaceship would melt as soon as you reached approximate distance, melting distance, you'd be fried.
Let's say I don't land on the star, but I can approach it safely.
How close are you going to get to the star?
The question is almost rhetorical, right? It's no, I don't believe that. And it would take a ton of evidence for you to even start to take that seriously, that, okay, maybe you do. Now, when I hear you say Jesus existed, that's like me owning a car. But when you say Jesus rose from the dead, that's like owning a spaceship that can go from star to star. You see how the requirement for evidence goes up?
Yeah, I do, and I think you're right. It's a good point. The requirement for evidence goes up. So, and I think what I wanted to, and actually I have to say I have a phone call I've got to get on at 2:00 with a woman named Wendy McClellan, who's I also found on Twitter. So I don't have too much more time, but I do think that, and I'm sorry about that. We could always continue. But I do think you're right, and I want to highlight the fact that I was a skeptic, just like you. Actually, I was maybe even more skeptical than you are for many years, a couple of decades. It took me, even after going into the church and being baptized and seeing the pastor, I kept questioning. I'm still questioning. But the more that I question, it seems the more solid the answer comes in. And the more experiences I have to look back and say, now that situation that occurred to me makes sense now. And this makes sense. I feel meaning and purpose. And I honestly would encourage your listeners to think about the benefits of just grasping and opening the door to Jesus and saying, listen,
But we shouldn't believe
Just answer.
Should we believe things that are true? In fact, I asked you that question. It's important. It's important to believe things if it gives you comfort. I forget exactly how. Oh, here it is. It is okay to believe something that is false if it gives you comfort. And you said disagree. So
Right, and so Christianity is not a religion that gives you comfort. Christianity, if you take it seriously, is a religion that's going to give you a lot of stress because you're going to have to bear your own cross. It's not easy. C.S. Lewis said that once.
Okay. To wrap things up, though, I just want to hammer on that point that I think you and I are agreed on, and that is that as the claim gets bigger, the level of evidence should get bigger too. And so to say I have a car, yeah, if you kind of doubted me, you could say, show me a picture of you in front of your car and I'll believe you. Good enough. I believe you, Doug. But when it comes to a nuclear missile or a spaceship that goes from star to star, wow, you need tremendous amount of evidence. Now, when it comes to a man rising from the dead, if you're agreed that that level should go up as the claims go up, do we have that kind of evidence for a resurrected man when the guys who do this for a living say that, look, this is not a historical analysis. The people who wrote the Gospels are not eyewitnesses to the event. And even if they were, that doesn't mean that what they thought they saw was real or true. Like, is this the type of evidence that we're going to base our lives on?
Can I answer?
Sure.
Another thing that the Oxford Annotated Bible didn't take into consideration is the fact that Paul was an eyewitness. Paul told us that he was an eyewitness several times. He was an eyewitness to Jesus on the road to Damascus. So people can try to deny that all day long. Paul wrote over half of the New Testament books. And so Paul himself is an eyewitness. So it's not fair that the Oxford group decided to make that. He was an eyewitness to Jesus. He saw Jesus on the road to Damascus.
Now you believe that because
let me just actually
because the book says so, right?
I believe that because I took all of the information that's given. Now let me just to talk about your point that there's not enough, that we need a lot of evidence. You and I are in complete agreement. We need a lot of evidence. I mean, there's no way that I would want to follow a faith that isn't true for no reason, based on just pure blind faith. I wouldn't follow a faith for that reason, or religion. What I want to say is historians require two pieces of evidence. They like to have two pieces of evidence to actually claim something occurred, or to say probability that something occurred in the past is more likely or less likely. With two pieces of evidence, it makes it stronger than one. Now, within 150 years of Jesus' resurrection, we have 33 Christian sources and 9 secular sources that all provide validity evidence for the New Testament. We have some of the sources are in the New Testament, but we also have sources outside of the New Testament.
You're talking about what is it called, the 42.7 apologetic, right? Is that where you're going with this?
Well, where did I get the information? I actually got it. Where did I get that? Habermas, actually. Gary Habermas provided that information. He's one source, and Mike Licona, you mentioned him earlier. So those two, they have a book together, and in their book, I found that
There's
piece of
so
information.
much information out there that you could easily look up that would totally push up against that, what you just said. The whole idea of attestations and manuscript evidence. I'm not going to do it, but I could rattle off the top of my head all the reasons why you should not believe based on that. But it's not going to make any difference, so I'm not even going to even try. So but I will encourage you that when you post things on blogs, try to write stuff that would actually cause doubt in your followers, your Christian followers.
You're so funny. Why? Now, why would I do that? Because you don't post things that post out.
Why?
Are you posting?
Yes.
No. When you write something, I don't see your writings because I don't know if you write anything. Do you write anything? Do you write blogs?
No, I don't write blogs, but I have on my channel challenged atheists and pushed them to say, look, be open to the idea of God, because what if it's true? What if there's even a God out there that's hidden right now, but will reveal himself in the year 2101 or something? And I challenge atheists all the time, have something specific that would change your mind. Have a marker in your life that would change your mind. Just like I think you should have a marker in your life where you'd say, you know what? If this is true, if I saw this or learned that, whatever, I would abandon Christianity. And when we went through this list of different things, they strongly agree and agree, you said that you agreed that you should try to disconfirm your beliefs. So,
and Doug, I want to highlight again, I've done that. I've spent 20 years basically doing that, always questioning.
I don't see it on your blogs.
After walked in the church.
I don't see it on your blogs.
Well, that's because, I don't really, I'm trying to think of what the counter, when I post links, sometimes I'll post the links to articles that cite both sides. For example, I cited earlier when I posted the link that had the conservative dates and the liberal view of the dates. So I did post both.
So I would love to see from you 10 reasons why the Gospels are not reliable. Reasons why Christians shouldn't use manuscript evidence as good evidence, because there's only 124 of them in the first 400 years. And as you get older, there's more and more discrepancies between them. Maybe write a blog about purposeful changes within the New Testament, purposeful misquotes within the New Testament. And if anything I'm saying to you is like, what are you talking about, Doug? There's no misquotes. There's no purposeful changes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you haven't even begun to study what you believe.
Well, here, and I appreciate your advice. And I'll take that into consideration. I did want to say something though that I think you'll appreciate. I did appreciate the fact that when I went to Mike Winger's, that's where I found Mike Winger was on your video, and since that I've been watching a lot of his videos, and I think he does a pretty good job. He's a pastor in California, but I was appreciating the fact, because I always go into the Non Sequiturs channel every so often. I haven't been on there that much lately, but I've been on there watching their things, and I'm always like one of the only Christians in their group. And I saw when you were on Mike Winger's, I actually thought this was really funny. You were on Mike Winger's channel, and you were one of the only atheists. And I saw kind of like how it seemed like with me when I go on Non-Sec, I get all the atheists who kind of like, there she is, the Christian, the one Christian.
Oh yeah, I said one thing.
And it happened to you. I saw that.
I said one thing on Mike Winger's channel and the Christians just piled on to me big time. What did I say? Something about, because a lot of Christians they're proud of the fact that salvation is through grace and not works. And then I said, hey, is studying the evidence and researching the evidence for Jesus and being convinced that seeking out the proof, is that a work? Like, that takes a lot of work. It's not easy to be a researcher and study these things. And they didn't like that. It's like, no, that's not a work. That's not a work. But anyhow,
I did think that was really funny. But I have to give you credit for that, because you said you do look at other views, and here you were on his channel. He's a Christian.
I don't watch atheist channels. I don't.
So I have to give you credit. I'll give you a lot of credit for that. That was impressive.
I know J. Warner Wallace, Josh McDowell, C.S. Lewis. I know these apologists from young and old better than most Christians do. And I very rarely watch atheist channels. Once in a while I do. I mostly watch Christian channels. But I'm going to ask you a question that I've asked 26 people before in my life. Maybe it's 25. And I've only, I won't poison the well. But I'll end with this. It's a hypothetical thought experiment. You and I are in a car together. We get in a car accident. We both die because you were driving. No, I'm kidding.
That's probably more likely. I haven't been in an accident since I was 23, but I bet you I'd be the one who would be the accident. Sure.
I've never been in a car accident in my life that I was the driver. But anyhow, so we're both dead. And you're right, SJ. Yahweh is real. Jesus died for our sins, all this. And I was wrong. And Yahweh looks at us, and he looks at you, SJ, and says, well done, good and faithful servant. I'm so proud of you, SJ. Oh, I just loved the work you did and the blogs you wrote. I'm so happy you ignored Doug's advice and just didn't bring doubt to Christians. And then he looks at me and says, Doug, you schmuck. Oh, I gave you so much evidence. It was clear to see. And you just, I don't know, you're stubborn? What? Anyhow, but Doug, I do like you. In fact, I love you. I love you, Doug. and this is a one-time deal. So SJ, Doug, if SJ is willing to give up heaven, Doug won't go to hell. You're not switching. Yahweh says, no, we're not switching here. Just SJ gives up heaven, and if she's willing to do that, Doug won't go to hell. And I'll both just annihilate your souls. I will annihilate both of your souls. Do you take Yahweh up on his deal?
Let me answer this. Yahweh is a very just and merciful Lord. And the fact that Yahweh is just and merciful, Yahweh would never make that offer.
This is a hypothetical thought experiment.
If Yahweh were to make that offer, would I go to, I don't know you very well. Now, if you were to ask me about my kids, then you'd have a better, I love my kids. So if you asked me about my kids and they were in your shoes and they were like you seem like a really nice guy, but, I have to admit, I'd rather be in heaven. I'm sorry, but if you were to ask me about my kids, I think you have a better chance of me saying I'd give up.
So remember, you're not going to hell.
I'm sorry, I just met you for an hour. Come on.
But you're clear. You're clear that you're not going to hell. It's just you.
But where am I going to go? Like just floating around?
You're annihilated.
Well, I don't want that. I want to go to heaven.
You're not going to miss anything. You'll be gone. It's like.
I don't want to be annihilated, though, Doug. I like the idea of being around. Okay. I look forward to heaven. I've been planning for it. It's sort of a good deal.
So your answer is no. You'd let me go to hell. I've asked that question to 25 people, and only, I think, 4 have said yes. But I want to chastise you a bit, because you mentioned that you might do it for your son or daughter. But isn't it easy to sacrifice yourself for someone you love? How much harder it is to sacrifice yourself for a stranger. But isn't my thought experiment exactly what Jesus did in your worldview?
Yes.
But you're not willing to do what Jesus did.
Well, no, let me explain that. Jesus didn't do it for strangers. Jesus did it for everyone. And to no one, Jesus is a stranger. Jesus knows everyone. So he knows you, Doug. He knows you from the inside and the outside. He's grown up with you. He watched you when you were little. Yes, he knows you. So no, he hasn't touched. Come on, Doug. Now let's not get our minds in the gutter there.
No, that's a hymn. That's a real hymn.
Okay.
Yeah.
It didn't sound very good. Sorry to whoever wrote that hymn.
Well, we used to always chuckle in church when we heard that hymn, because it was like, oh, Jesus touched me.
Well, yeah, I could tell though when you were singing. Anyway, so he knows you. So it's a little different. Jesus died for everyone, not strangers. He died for all humanity, and he knows everyone. He knows us all like the back of our hands. He knows your heart, Doug. And he knows, and actually, if Yahweh were to make the decision, I'm sorry, Jesus is the one who's going to be standing at the door. But if Jesus were to make the decision, depending on whatever you did in your life, what if you changed your mind at the last minute? Do you think you still have a chance? Like if you said, we're both in that car, and right at the last minute, right as the car's about to crash, you see us skidding into another car going off the ramp. And I look at you and I say, Doug, do you believe in Jesus? And as the car is hitting, you yell, yes, I believe. And then all of a sudden, do you think it's worthy that you're deserving of heaven for eternity?
Even Satan believes in Jesus. Does he go to heaven? No. You got to be a
follower.
Well, I don't know. An active belief, not a passive belief. There's a lot of phony Christians out there, don't you know?
Yeah, there are. I don't want to be like a no true Scotsman, but sure, there are people who say they're Christian and they're in the churches abusing people. So I think that's another story for another day. But
if Christians really believed what they say they believe, they would be witnessing and evangelizing, and they're not.
Well, you can't group them all together. Some aren't.
Most of them in the United States. Anytime I have a conversation with a Christian who doesn't know me, if they're not mentioning the gospel to me, then that tells me that they don't have a real either ontology that there's a real hell out there or a real bad place in the afterlife. If they're not taking every opportunity to witness to me, that tells me they really don't believe it, or they just don't care. They just don't love like Jesus commanded them to love. So I really think that most people really don't believe it.
I think that I don't think that it's not that they don't believe it. I think that they don't. I think that there's a lot of apathy in the United States. I think that we're a very comfortable society. A lot of people have lots of money, and people, I look at my own family and how they are over in Boca Raton. It's a beautiful place. There's lots of money. There's all the toys you could possibly imagine. Everyone's on their boats all weekend.
You remind me of something. Cy 10 Bruggenkate.
Oh, yeah. He's great.
Remember, he was on my channel, and I asked him if he would pray for me, and he was smart. He said no, because it's actually not biblical to pray in public, at least not in front of non-believers per se. But anyhow, I admired him for that, but I kept my word, and at the end, when the live stream was done, he and I stayed on air, and he prayed for me. And what you just said reminded me of that, because in the United States we have things are so good, wealth and so forth. And I think he said this on Twitter, so I'm not saying anything he wouldn't want me to be said. But he prayed that my life would become tumultuous.
Oh, no. Why would he do
No, why would he do that? He was exactly right. What Cy did was the exact thing a Christian should pray for, because he realizes that a guy like me, I don't need to pray to God to help pay my electric bill. I don't need to pray to God to that help me find my keys or whatever. Even if I was to get stage 4 cancer tomorrow, I'm the type of guy that I would accept my impending death. I don't fear death. I fear pain, but I don't fear death. I have no desire to live forever. He knows that if Christianity is true, Cy knows that in order for this Jesus to reach me is to make me desperate. But how sad is that? That Christianity, at least in some people's minds, is they know that if you're not indoctrinated into it, that the next step is desperation. You have to be so desperate in order to believe this. That just spoke volumes to me. But I think he was right. I think, especially for adults who are, let's say, over the age of 30, to come to Christianity or Islam or any God belief requires desperation.
I think, and just to be fair, I don't think every Christian who's older comes that way. I mean, I certainly wasn't desperate when I came. I have a very eady life, to be honest. I have challenges, but in general,
but
it's comfortable.
what you brought up, I think, had an impact on you. Like you mentioned meaning and purpose right away, and you mentioned,
yes,
and I don't know why, but you mentioned that experience with a man in the back seat, and so maybe that in the back of your subconscious was like a reason to believe because of either security, protection, fear of death, and that's all wrapped up into meaning and purpose as well. And I don't think it was a coincidence that you mentioned that story. And there were people in the chat saying, she's bloviating, she's talking too much, stop her. I said, no. I defended you. I said, this is important to SJ. Let her talk. And I think this is the fundamental reason for you, or what the main benefit of the belief gives you. But anyhow, you got 4 minutes before your phone call.
I know I gotta send Wendy the link. I haven't even done that. I'll have to start that probably at 2:15. So it's, but I want to say I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Actually, let me say something. You asked me to come on your channel probably a year ago, and maybe even 2 years ago. I mean, you asked me a long time ago to come on, and I have to be honest. I was like, no, I'm not going to go on the channel, and I didn't want to. I didn't even want to until a few days ago, and then Craig Reed kept saying, PineCreek, Doug's such a nice guy. Cy Garrett always talks very highly of you. And so I thought, and Cy 10 Bruton God, he also has said nice things about you. So I thought, okay, well, all of these people really like Doug, so they must be onto something. And so so I watched some more of your videos and I decided, okay, I'll go on his channel. I'll risk it.
I'm tough but fair.
And you're a nice, and I'll recommend that my other friends that haven't been on your channel, if you were to ask them, I'll recommend that they go on, because you seem like a pretty nice guy, and I think you have a good approach, and I think you're fair. So I want to give you that.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I do appreciate you coming on and having a change of mind about me. But yeah, thanks again. Your blog is, what's it called? How do people?
Christian-apologist.com. So they can also reach me on Twitter at lead1225.
Okay. Well, I always thought it was lead, but it's lead. Okay.
Yeah, of course you did. Fair enough.
Okay. Well, you have a great day. Get to your phone call, and I'll say a little bit and then turn off the live stream later.
All right. Thank you.
Just press the X and you're out of here.
Okay. Thanks.
See ya.
Let me just hold on.
Okay, I just want to, sorry guys, I didn't look at the chat very much. I was kind of busy pulling verses out and so forth. But for anybody who donated, I saw there was a few donations that came in. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. The kids will go to Applebee's or maybe Denny's tonight if the donations were high enough. And I'm not sure if there was any questions that people had for SJ, but you can contact her directly via Twitter, and she gave you her Twitter account or via her website. I don't know my final thoughts on it. I have no misconceptions that anything I say is going to have any impact on her or vice versa. Like, I probably know what she knows as far as the biblical evidence and so forth. But I do think the pivotal moment was that whole idea of matching evidence to claims, and that she agreed with that. And I think upon reflection, I hope that the evidence we have for a man rising from the dead after 3 days doesn't match that type of big claim. And that's huge. And I want to thank Ben Diesel for that strongly agree, neutral. I thought that was very interesting. I want to watch that back on how she answered those questions and then compare to how she answered with when we started getting into Christianity. So thanks a lot, guys. We will see you next time.